maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
14, 15 years old. Woods in Northfield.
Northfield, Vermont.
Northfield, Vermont.
Yeah.
Grew up there.
And you've been in the woods quite a bit, right?
Quite a bit.
Just even when you were a kid. So you know what the animals are.
Oh, yeah.
You know what...
Exactly. So me and my buddies were up trying to find a cabin, Northfield Woods.
You're just above Devil's Wash Bowl, right?
Same range, a little south. It's starting to get dark. I have my dirt bike down at the bottom of the walking trail.
Yeah.
So I break off from the group of friends, start hustling down the trail, get maybe 3/4 of the way down, and I can feel something, I can see something like with me in the woods, keeping my pace. Just out of sight, it's thick up there. Stop short, yell out my buddies' names, thinking it's one of them.
Yeah, horsing around.
Right. And then the thing pops out in front of me. Maybe 20 feet, 15, 20 feet. Trail kind of turned. It's really thick. Whatever it was on 2 feet, right? Hissing like I've never heard no hiss before.
Strange.
Can't even describe it. Whoosh, whoosh, just weird. Very, very weird. I screamed. It took off. I went down to my dirt bike the rest of the way to come back to see if I can find it. My buddies had come down by that point, heard me screaming,
right.
Said I was as white as a ghost. It was taller than us. Not terribly, but
yeah, so
taller than
6
rolling.
foot, 7 foot?
Yeah, 6
I'm
foot.
6'1",
6
and
and
it
a
was
half.
taller than me.
I'd say, man.
And it was dark in color.
Yep.
Something is happening in the woods of Vermont, and like you guys are going to see in today's episode, this man is not alone. In fact, eyewitnesses have disturbing accounts going back years, but to fully grasp it, we need to go back to 1971. Imagine this, you're in high school. Everything has been leading up to this one night. It's the big dance, it's a huge celebration, and all your friends are there. Well, except a few who disappeared halfway through. You saw them earlier, but when you look for them later, they're nowhere to be found. Until they burst in halfway through the night, running like they're trying to get away from someone or something, sobbing and screaming the entire time. This was exactly what happened in 1971 at Northfield High School in Vermont. When the teens finally calmed down, they admitted to having ditched the dance halfway through. They said that they had gone off to sneak a few beers at the local cemetery behind the school. You see, down in the cemetery, there was a sand pit where all the teenagers hung out whenever they didn't want to be found. Well, the students explained that all was going fine until, deep in the darkness, one of them noticed something among the trees. And at first, they thought that it was an adult, that they had been busted. But as the figure drew closer, they were able to make out more details. And those details were not human. Basically, the teens said that they had been approached by something walking on 2 legs. It didn't wear any clothes. Instead, it was covered head to foot in shaggy white fur. And some retellings of the story say it had talons, but everyone agrees about its head. The students said that its face was a horrible mixture of human features and the face of a pig. And so shortly after sharing this story, some of the braver kids got together and headed down to the sandpit themselves. While they didn't find whatever had stepped out of the shadows, they did find a few partly empty beer cans. One of the students, Jeff Hatch, said that there weren't any tracks, but did say that the grass was beat down, that something had been there. And these were tiny details, but they all suggested that, whatever happened that night, the students had seen something. After all, they worked so hard to go drinking, why would they leave some of the cans partway full? As this story made its way into the broader community of Northfield, things started to make more and more sense. Over the years, residents had noticed odd things here and there, including sightings of strange figures lurking in the night, and there were also reports of livestock, pets, and even people that disappeared overnight. For example, in the spring of 1971, the son of a local farmer had gone out to Darby Hill. The blonde-haired teenager vanished without a trace, despite a massive search party that was organized for the boy. And then, shortly thereafter, more animals began to disappear in the area around Turkey Hill, just 2 miles away. And as it turns out, it was in this exact same area that another farmer caught sight of the pig man. The farmer had been alerted to something on his property late one night when he heard a racket in his yard. It sounded like something was rummaging around in his trash, probably a dog or a raccoon, and he grabs his shotgun, then steps over to the window and flicks on the floodlights. There, caught in the bright light, he saw something digging through the bin. And then, thinking it was a person, the farmer slams open the door and shouts, "Get the hell out of here." And in that moment, the intruder looks straight in his direction, revealing a face that was a hideous mixture of pig and human features. As the teens would later describe, it was covered entirely in long, light-colored hair. Well, the moment that their eyes met, the pig man turned on its heels and raced down the driveway, crossing over into the woods. Now, the farmer would later recount how it was definitely naked and that it ran on 2 feet. Now, this was just a few days before the incident at Northfield High School. It seemed to confirm that these stories had some merit. That certainly was the takeaway for Jeff Hatch. Remember, Jeff was one of the students who investigated the sighting down by the sand pit. Because it left him so interested, Jeff soon grew to have a minor obsession with finding the pigman. Along with several other friends, Jeff started looking into local farms. Basically, he thought it was the best place to start. Maybe what his friends had seen was just an oversized pig on the loose. Maybe they'd been mistaken about how it walked on 2 legs. So, Jeff and his friends started with an old pig farm near Union Brook, the only pig farm they were aware of. The moment they arrived, they felt like they were someplace they shouldn't be. You see, this was no quaint farmhouse. It was a dirty, broken place, just a big barn and several sheds, all on the verge of collapse. In the middle of it all was a pigsty with several immense hogs inside. And Jeff later claimed that there were giant pigs there, 500 and 600 pounders. They were gigantic. Well, Jeff and his buddies poked around inside every place they were able to reach. Inside the barn, the floor was littered with old animal bones. And as creepy as that was, what was creepier was a big area off to the side. There, it looked as if something human-sized was sleeping each night on a bed of hay, flattened down from the weight. Jeff explained that something seemed to be sleeping there in the same room as the dead animals. Luckily for him, it was daylight, and the owner of the hay bed was nowhere to be seen. Now, the farm that Jeff Hatch and his friends investigated was near an area called the Devil's Wash Bowl, 15 minutes outside downtown Northfield in Moortown. This spot gets its name from a deep natural depression. Here, deep in the forest, it's always dark, even at noon, and it always feels hotter than anywhere else. An unmaintained dirt road known as Wash Bowl Road runs around the rim, and only a few houses, some empty, and an abandoned farm can be found there. Mainly, all you'll see is trees, a waterway, and a few caves scattered throughout the area. The perfect home base for a pigman. Now, clearly, it is the perfect spot for young people in search of some time alone. In other words, the Devil's Wash Bowl became known as a lover's lane, so to speak, where high schoolers went to make out in their cars and do other things. Well, one couple fooling around in the back seat at the wash bowl found this out the hard way. Pardon the pun. At some point, the boyfriend stepped out of the car to relieve himself along the side of the road. He was midstream when something slammed into him, and then he felt himself lifted up off the ground by a pair of strong hands that brought him into the air and then tossed him into the side of his car, and he landed on the ground with a thud. So his girlfriend is still inside the vehicle, and she not only feels the car rock, but also the sound of him slamming into the door and falling to the dirt road. And the next thing she knows, he's inside the car and the two of them are tearing down Wash Bowl Road, headed back into town. Now, eventually, word of this encounter gets around and local law enforcement quickly gets involved. They collect a description of the person who attacked the boyfriend. And folks, things are about to get hairy, because they realize that what he's describing isn't a person at all. It's a completely different description than what they could ever imagine. And it's consistent with what people were seeing earlier that year. Between 5'8" and 5'10" tall, hairy, white, and with the clear facial features of a pig. Its hands, the boyfriend explained, were tipped in long, sharp fingernails or talons. Now, when people don't believe this aspect of the story, the boyfriend simply shows them his chest and arms. His skin was marked red with long red scratches. Either he was attacked by a pig man or his girlfriend is really aggressive. Well, police officers made a show of investigating, but didn't really do a thorough job. Instead, that duty fell on Jeff, who is deep into his pigman investigations at this point. He and his friend made a thorough search of the Devil's Wash Bowl, and again, they didn't find the creature itself, but they did stumble upon some of the caves in the area. Jeff claimed that the biggest ones held several piles of bones. He would explain that there was no sign of a fire, but there was bedding in the cave, hay probably from a pig farm. And he also thought he might have found some tracks in the damp ground around the wash bowl, although he couldn't be certain. He even explained that if these really were footprints, they didn't come from a human being. Now, in the years since the sightings began, others have found similar strange footprints in the Devil's Wash Bowl as well. And they also claim to still see the pigman in and around Northfield to this very day, sometimes crossing in front of cars. Almost every eyewitness describes the feature as ghostly white as it runs across the lanes. Others say that they hear weird sounds deep in the forest, noises that sound like the grunting of pigs or blood-curdling screams. This is what happened to local Chad Clark. You see, as a student living south of Montpelier in the 1970s, Chad and some friends took a trip to find the pigman of Devil's Wash Bowl for themselves. It was a cold day in the fall, and Chad still remembers how ominous the drive felt. He explained that during the drive into the wash bowl, it was like driving down a one-way road into the heart of darkness itself, the area surrounded by hills, and there was only one road in and one road out. And so when they finally parked the car, Chad and his buddies stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, and the entire area just felt off. It was eerie. It seemed far too quiet for a forest. And soon, their conversation turned into how the pigman could easily be watching them from a hidden spot on the rim of the Devil's Fishbowl, hidden by the trees. They'd had no idea that they were being stalked. Now, Chad eventually found the conversation just a little too uncomfortable for his liking, and he told everybody to shut up. And so after a few more moments, they all piled back in the car, windows down, and apparently everybody felt the same way that Chad did. Then, just when they had let their guards down, they heard this high-pitched howl, or was it a squeal, that shattered the stillness of the Devil's Wash Bowl. Now, it wasn't 3 seconds later that they were tearing back down that dirt road, and they remember looking at their knuckles on the steering wheel, and they were completely white, just like the other guys' faces were. They all had nightmares on and off for the following few weeks, and they all discussed that ungodly noise in that ungodly place. They never trifled with the pigman again. Best to let sleeping pigs lie, they decided. Now, you might be asking yourself, Josh, I believe in Bigfoot, I believe in dogman, but where does a pigman come from? Well, there are several theories. Remember that farmer's son I mentioned a while back? You know, the one who disappeared in 1971? Well, some people think that he is the pigman. They say that he evolved or devolved into the creature after his disappearance. But that doesn't make much sense, does it? No one could change from a regular teenager into a monster in less than a year's time. Unless, of course, they were a werepig, but now that I think about it, I've had some classmates who, Anyway, the pigman origin story that most people believe begins 20 years earlier. You see, folks say that on October 30th, 1951, the night before Halloween, a young man was looking for some mischief. His name was Sam Harris, and no, not the philosopher, a different Sam Harris. You see, this Mr. Harris had a reputation as a bit of a troublemaker, and he had the perfect excuse. Local tradition called the evening before Halloween a picket night, a night when pranks were played on everyone in the community. And so Sam set out into the north field with a bucket full of eggs, ready to ruin some houses and cars. Well, here's the thing. Sam supposedly never returned. Just like the farmer's son in 1971, he simply vanished without a trace. Now, according to the legend, his parents awoke the next morning only to find his bed empty. The whole community turned out to search for this kid, but came up empty-handed, despite scouring hundreds of square miles. But other people said that Sam Harris was alive and well. Basically said that he went out into the woods and went crazy. Maybe he was even possessed by the devil himself after going into the devil's washbowl. Either way, Sam, or whatever he became, started living in the wilderness. And it was said that he started killing pigs and eating their guts. Some people said that his face transformed into a pig's. Other people said that each time he slaughtered swine, he would take their heads, hollow them out, and wear their faces as a flesh mask. When people see the pigman today, they're either seeing Sam Harris or one of his children, the offspring of having his way with the pigs he didn't kill. Ugh. Now, whether or not it is Sam Harris, people still see the Vermont pigman through to this very day. Now, according to Joseph A. Citro's Weird New England, a man driving along Washbowl Road by himself one night was surprised to see a white, shaggy figure burst out of the tree line and then hop onto the hood of his car. And as he slammed on his brakes, he got a good look at the face, if only for a second. I mean, it looked like a person, but was hairy and had the face of a pig. Then it bounced off the car and back into the woods. Another tale that surfaced online involved a few high school students having their own shocking encounter. According to the story, a girl and several friends, all seniors, decided to go spend some time in the Devil's Washbowl in the 1980s. All told, there were about 8 people, some couples, who decided to camp overnight. But they made a mistake. Instead of pitching their tents, they decided to spend the night in the caves. Now remember, Jeff Hatch discovered evidence in some of these caves that suggested that they were inhabited. But this was by design. The kids actually wanted something spooky to happen. Bad move, right? Well, the group separated into several of the caves, one couple per cave. That way, they could maximize their chances of seeing the pigman. Now, according to the person who shared the account, one couple was just settling in when they heard horrible screams from nearby, and it sounded like it was coming from another cave. Now, the original couple ran in the direction of the screams, and when they got there, they found one of the girls in tears. She was all alone, curled up in the deepest corner. They had asked her what had happened, and in short, she swore that just moments after they had arrived, a horrible half-man, half-pig creature had appeared from the bushes and calmly walked into the cave. Well, the couple screamed at the creature, but it barely noticed them. Instead, it bent down, grabbed a heavy rock from the floor of the cave, and smashed her boyfriend over the head. The instant he collapsed to the ground, it snatched him up and vanished back into the forest. Well, the girl wasn't sure whether her boyfriend was even alive or just knocked unconscious. Either way, her story seemed to have some truth to it. The boyfriend was nowhere to be seen, and one of the larger stones on the floor of the cave seemed to be covered in blood. Well, the rest of the students immediately organized a search. They pushed through the thick underbrush of the Devil's Washbowl, flashlights in hand, looking for any sign of their fallen friend. They failed to turn up anything. Now, supposedly, and this is where the story kind of falls apart, law enforcement also put together a search team complete with canine units. The boy was never found, but his clothing was recovered, ripped to shreds on a nearby farm. Now, obviously, this should be verifiable if you look at police records, but the story has yet to be proven. Either that or there's an active pigman cover-up, which would be weird on its own. Whether or not this story from the 1980s is true, the legend of the Devil's Washbowl pigman endures in Northfield. But Vermont isn't the only American state to have a pigman. No, reports of this thing come from lots of different places. Pigmen supposedly haunt forests and bridges in Texas, New York, Georgia, and even the United Kingdom. A lot of these seem like nothing more than urban legends, but some local legends are actually accompanied by eyewitness testimony. Pigmen have even been spotted in urban settings. In fact, according to Linda Godfrey's book, American Monsters, a family in Mariemont, Ohio, I hope I'm saying that right, had to evacuate their neighborhood the afternoon of July 26, 1974 because of a gas leak. In fact, Linda wrote that the family was cruising southward on Homewood Avenue when all four of them noticed strangest being mincing its way along the sidewalk in their direction. This thing stood about 5 feet tall and walked upright with its body tilted forward, arms swinging sideways rather than front to back. They couldn't see its face below the bald head, possibly because at least part of the face was covered with hair or fur. Its only clothing was what the family assumed to be dark-colored pants. Now, the mother swung their vehicle around and they all craned their necks for a second look, but by the time they reached the spot where it had been, it was now gone. In fact, one of the most famous Pigman legends comes to us straight from Tennessee. You see, Me-Man Shelby Forest is a 539-acre state park in Millington, right near Memphis. And during World War II, part of the forest was dedicated to a munitions manufacturing plant. Now, between 1940 and 1946, the Chickasaw Ordnance Works power plant ran non-stop 24/7, with the exception of Christmas Day on 1942. Well, according to local legend, a worker was disposing of chemicals into one of the creeks back in the 40s, and then he decided to take a smoke break. But there was residue on his hands, and the resulting explosion left him horrifically scarred. It was said that the blast completely took off his nose. After recovering at Kennedy Hospital in Memphis, the worker returned to the plant, but all of his coworkers shunned him, calling him Pigman because of his nose. Now, supposedly, he vanished into what became Me-Man Shelby Forest State Park, where he set up a makeshift home beneath a bridge. Now, eventually, rumors began spreading that the Pigman was abducting children, taking them under the bridge and eating them for dinner. As to exactly which bridge this was, well, there are several candidates. Lots of people think it's the bridge on Shake Rag Road, which sits at the turn just past the old smokestacks where the Pigman once worked. Now, according to local folklore, anyone can head out to the bridge and summon the Pigman. This is best done when the moon is full. You head out there, you stop on the bridge and roll down your window, then you flash your lights 3 times, each time shouting, "Pigman, Pigman, Pigman." If you do this and remain patient, something strange is supposed to happen. But what happens exactly? Well, stories vary. Some people say you'll see the Pigman himself, others say you'll only hear him. One group of thrill seekers, 3 young men, set out to conjure the Pigman one night. After flashing their lights, they heard a pig-like squeal somewhere deep in the forest, immediately followed by a barking dog. This went on for a while until finally they saw the Pigman. Lyle S. Russell of the Tennessee Ghosts and Legends podcast explained that they described Pigman as a person, not an animal, and he had tumor-like bulbous features on his face, and likely a homeless person who taps into the Pigman legend and tries to scare people away from where he lives in the woods. Now, at this point, it probably seems easy enough to avoid your local Pigman if you're unlucky enough to have one. Just don't go into his house. But what if you had to go where the Pigman lives? Well, this is exactly what one group of students has to face every single day. I mean, school is bad enough, right? But can you imagine a Pigman being there too? Well, we all know that, teacher. Now, according to interviews conducted in 2007, both students and faculty at Florida's Deerfield Beach Elementary School had encounters with something on the property that they couldn't begin to explain. Now, it started off simple enough. A former DBES student recalled the events. It was November 3rd, 1973, during the second period class. And this is when the first incident happened. a normally quiet girl who sat in the back of the room stood up and began pointing out the window, yelling that, "Pigman, Pigman, it's a pigman." And of course, the scene both shocked and amused the class, as the whole situation just didn't make sense. Now, nonetheless, being curious as normal kids are, they all jumped up, bolted to the window to see the thing she was screaming at. Though they didn't see anything, the frightened girl had to be consoled by the teacher and then hurried off to the infirmary room to be calmed down and finally sent home for the day. The event naturally excited the students and prompted them to begin telling stories and drawing pictures of the newly dubbed Pigman of Deerfield Beach. Now, as you might imagine, as the week went on, pigman hysteria seized the elementary school. It had almost died down when, towards the end of the week, a pair of boys claimed that they had seen the pigman from their classroom window. Apparently, it was living in the nearby woods. Things quieted down at Deerfield Beach Elementary School until the holidays rolled around. Then, the pigman appeared again before Thanksgiving, but not just to a student. This time, it appeared to an entire classroom. Students and faculty recalled the dreaded pigman peeking into a first-floor classroom window and scaring several kids to the brink of tears, actually forcing a few of them to find cover under their desks. This time, however, the teachers saw the thing as it withdrew from the window and then darted across the wooded field. This time, the legend took on a far more frightening feel than ever before. What they could remember about the day is that the teacher yelled out to another teacher from an adjacent classroom and then simply shut the doors. The principal arrived, and soon after that, the police showed up too. And they could remember everyone was amazed to see policemen walking around the grounds and talking to each other, as well as throughout the classrooms talking to teachers and students. They all wondered if it could be true after all. I mean, was there a real pigman? And as dramatic as this sighting had been, everyone had a lot on their plate. The end of the year came and went, and the pigman faded into memory yet again. But the saga wasn't over. On a Wednesday in March of 1974, another encounter unfolded, this time during recess. A former DBES student, Jay Peterson, said that the students were on the playground when they heard a high-pitched scream coming from near the highway. While it didn't sound like a pig, it definitely wasn't another kid. It sounded more like an adult. More curious than afraid, all of the students rushed from the playground to see what it was. When they rounded the corner by the back field near the basketball courts, one of the 5th grade teachers was urgently escorting a bunch of kids from the area. This was immediately followed by more teachers, all ushering everyone from the playground back into the cafeteria. When they arrived, the 2 kids found 2 teachers animatedly discussing something with the vice principal. 2 of the lunchroom cooks were rushing outside. All the adults instructed their students to sit down and put their heads on the table. Once again, the police arrived to scour the school grounds in search of somebody or something that shouldn't be there. The teacher who spotted the pigman, who was lurking from behind a few Australian pines that littered the backfields, said that the man was about 5'8" and must have weighed around 275 pounds. He wore tattered, faded blue jeans and a red flannel shirt with checkers, like those of a lumberjack. The face, she said, was indeed like that of a pig, complete with a turned-up nose and oddly shaped ears. The weird man had tusk-like teeth jutting out of his mouth with eyes that were glazed over like that of a blind man. When the teacher spotted this thing, they both made eye-to-eye contact, and the pigman ran off as if he were frightened of her, as if he were ashamed of himself. Now, by the end of the day, while still gathered in the lunchroom, an officer told the students that they would be fine and that the pigman was most likely just a guy, and that the police would eventually find him. He went on to tell them that he was most likely just a man with a deformity and that he might have come from a special home for such people, which was actually located up the street. So just remember, no matter how much school sucks, at least you don't have to worry about running into a pigman, or maybe that would make school more interesting. I don't know. What do you think? Better or worse to have a pigman at school? And because all of you have made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below, pulled pork. That way, I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys are hungry for more storytelling like this, then slap that like and subscribe button for more videos just like today's. And of course, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.